Washington, East Texas Congressman Nathaniel Moran has reintroduced legislation to stop U.S. companies from doing business with companies tied to a western region in China, where the Chinese government is accused of committing genocide against the ethnic minority. KLTV7's Michael Richardson explains.
Not only is this an economic pushback, but frankly, this is a moral issue around the world.
In the Xinjiang region, the Chinese government has been accused of genocide against the Uyghur people. It's a sentiment that Congressman Nathaniel Moran, who is a member of the House Select Committee on China, echoes.
The Uyghur people group is enslaved there to effectively do their bidding, do the Chinese Communist Party's bidding, and to work on their behalf, and then those goods are sold, products are sold around the world.
The East Texas representative has reintroduced legislation that would prohibit government funds from supporting businesses in the Xinjiang region, an area that, according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, grows a majority of Chinese cotton.
One of the things that there's a bipartisan consensus on these days is that we need to have a tougher stance vis-a-vis China.
Latorno's Dr. John Barrett does not expect the bill to have a significant economic impact.
The larger concern for China is that you get a broader boycott against Chinese goods that can't be certified that they're not coming from Xinjiang.
Congressman Moran sees the act as a step towards holding China accountable.
This is not the end of the activity that needs to happen legislatively to stop this atrocious behavior and activity in China, but certainly is a good step forward.
The proposed law has been referred to the House Committee on Foreign Affairs. Michael Richardson, KLTV7 News.
And the congressman is confident the bill can pass in both chambers. Last session it passed the House, but not the Senate.